My name is Henry Calhoun, and I am 72 years old. For nearly a decade now, I have lived alone at the top of the Fairpine Hills, where the air is thin and the silence is absolute. After Mary died, I saw no reason to stay in the city. The noise, the lights, the relentless hurry of people who had places to be and things to accomplish. All of it reminded me that the world kept turning while I had stopped. So I sold what little remained of our life together, bought this old hunting cabin that had sat empty for years, and retreated into a kind of existence I can only describe as necessary. The cabin is small. 2 rooms, a narrow kitchen, a wood stove that coughs smoke on cold mornings. The roof leaks when it rains hard, and the floorboards creak in a language I have come to understand. There is no electricity beyond what the solar panels can muster, no internet, no television. Just the radio, which I keep on low most evenings, tuned to the weather station or the occasional news broadcast from the valley. I grow what I can in the small plot behind the house, tomatoes, beans, herbs that Mary used to love, and I fish in the stream that runs 200 meters downhill through the pines and over smooth stones that have been there longer than any living memory. The mornings are the best part. I wake before the sun, when the sky is still that deep blue-black that holds the last remnants of night. The only sounds are the pines swaying in the wind and the distant murmur of the stream. Sometimes I hear wolves, their howls thin and lonesome, echoing across the ridges. Sometimes I hear elk, the sharp crack of branches as they move through the underbrush near the property line. I write it all down in a notebook, not out of habit, but because I need the routine. Without it, I think I would lose myself entirely. Solitude has its own language, and absolute silence can teach you to hear things you were never meant to hear. My days follow a pattern that has become sacred to me. I wake at 6, feed Murphy, my old dog, a mixed breed with gray around his muzzle and a limp from some injury he sustained before I found him wandering the logging road years ago. I check the fence line, gather firewood, repair whatever is broken. I eat dinner at 7, simple meals that require no thought. I am in bed before 9, listening to the wind move through the trees like breathing. It is a kind of peace that most people would not understand. They would call it loneliness, isolation, a slow death. But to me it feels like the only honest thing I have left. Out here, there are no pretenses, no one to perform for, no one to tell me that time heals, that life goes on, that Mary would want me to be happy. Out here, I can be exactly what I am, a man who has lived too long and lost too much, waiting quietly for whatever comes next. The light in the mountains is different than anywhere else I have lived. In the morning, it comes slowly, filtering through the pine needles in thin golden beams that make the mist glow. By afternoon, it is harsh and bright, bleaching the grass and making the shadows sharp and clean. In the evening, it softens again, turning everything amber and rust until finally the darkness arrives, complete and total. There are no streetlights here, no headlights, no porch lamps from neighboring houses. Just the stars, more stars than I had ever seen in the city, and the moon when it decides to show itself. I began keeping the notebook after the first year. At first, it was just lists, tasks I needed to complete, supplies I needed to pick up on my monthly trip to town. But over time, it became something else. Observations, the temperature at dawn, the angle of the sun, the animals I saw, the dreams I had, the memories that surfaced without warning, unbidden and sharp. Writing them down made them feel less overwhelming, as though I could contain them on the page and prevent them from consuming me entirely. Murphy is my only companion. He is old now, like me, and we move through our days together with a kind of mutual understanding. He does not ask for much: food, water, the occasional scratch behind the ears. In return, he stays close, sleeping by the stove in winter, lying in the shade of the porch in summer. Sometimes I talk to him, telling him things I would never say to another person. He listens without judgment, his brown eyes patient and kind. The town is an hour and a half away by truck, down a winding dirt road that becomes impassable in winter. I go once a month for supplies: flour, coffee, canned goods, batteries. The people there know me, but we do not speak beyond pleasantries. They probably think I am strange, an old hermit who has lost his mind, Maybe they are right. I do not care. Their world feels distant to me now, a place I used to inhabit but no longer recognize. There is something purifying about this life. No distractions, no obligations, just the rhythm of the days, the cycle of the seasons, the slow accumulation of small tasks that give shape to time. I plant seeds and watch them grow. I mend the fence and watch it weather. I split wood and watch the pile shrink as winter approaches. It is enough. It has to be. But there is something else too, something I have noticed but tried not to think about. A quality to the silence that is not quite right. A heaviness in the air that seems to settle over the property as the sun goes down. Murphy feels it too. I see it in the way he watches the tree line, the way his ears prick at sounds I cannot hear. I tell myself it is nothing. Just the forest. Just the wind. Just my mind, aging and unreliable, playing tricks. Until the day the radio announced that a search and rescue team would be flying over the region looking for a group of campers who had gone missing somewhere in the high country. The news came through crackling and distorted, but I understood enough. 4 people, last seen a week ago somewhere, within a 20-mile radius of where I live. That night, the silence felt different, heavier, denser, as though the air itself was waiting for something. I stood on the porch long after dark, listening, feeling the cold creep into my bones. Murphy stayed inside, pressed against the door, whining softly. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination, just the loneliness finally catching up with me. But deep down, in a place I did not want to acknowledge, I knew something had changed. The world had been still for so long, and now it was moving again. And I was afraid of what that movement would bring. On the 3rd night after the announcement, I heard a sound that did not belong to the forest. It came from the direction of the stream, cutting through the darkness like something dragged across stone. Not the wind, though the wind was moving through the pines that night. Not an animal, though I have lived here long enough to know the voice of every creature that walks these hills. This was something else. Something that made the hair on my arms stand up and my breath catch in my throat. It sounded like someone moaning. A low, guttural plea that seemed to shape itself into words but never quite arrived at language. Help, it seemed to say. Please. The syllables stretched and broke, as though the thing making the sound was trying to remember how speech worked but could not quite manage it. The voice was rough, damaged, desperate. Murphy heard it too. He was lying by the stove, as he always did in the evening, but at the first sound, his head snapped up and his body went rigid. The growl that came from his throat was unlike anything I had heard from him before. Low and continuous, a warning that vibrated through the floorboards. The fur along his spine stood straight up, making him look twice his size. He backed away from the door, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the window, and I knew without question that whatever was out there was wrong. I grabbed the flashlight from the shelf and moved to the porch. The cold hit me immediately, sharp and biting, carrying with it a smell I could not place. Metallic, like old blood, but mixed with something organic and rotten. It reminded me of the time I found a deer carcass in the woods, already half consumed by scavengers, the smell so thick it clung to my clothes for days. I shone the light toward the stream, sweeping the beam across the trees and the undergrowth. The fog had settled low, hugging the ground in thick white layers that swallowed the light almost immediately. I could see maybe 20 feet, no more. Everything beyond that was just shapes and shadows, the suggestion of things rather than the things themselves. The sound came again, closer this time, and I felt my hand tighten around the flashlight until my knuckles ached. I wanted to call out, to ask if someone was hurt, if they needed help. But something stopped me. Some instinct, deep and primal, that told me to stay quiet, to stay inside, to lock the door and pretend I had heard nothing. I stood there for a long time, listening. The sound did not come again. Eventually, the cold drove me back inside, and I bolted the door and checked the windows and told myself it was nothing, just an animal, just the wind, just my mind, old and tired, hearing things that were not there. But I could not sleep. I lay in bed with the rifle across my chest, staring at the ceiling, listening to Murphy's low growl as he watched the door. The hours crawled by. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind, every branch scraping against the roof made my heart race. By the time dawn came, pale and gray through the window, I felt as though I had not slept in days. When the light was strong enough, I went outside to look. The air was cold and damp, and the mist still clung to the ground in patches. I walked slowly toward the stream, Murphy trailing behind me with his ears flat and his tail low. The smell was still there, faint but unmistakable. It led me to the muddy bank where the water ran shallow over smooth stones. That is where I found the prints. They were deep, pressed into the soft mud as though whatever made them had been carrying a great weight. At first glance, they looked almost human. The general shape was right, heel, arch, toes, but the proportions were wrong, too long, stretched out in a way that made them seem distorted, as though someone had taken a normal footprint and pulled it like clay. The toes ended in sharp, pointed marks, deep gouges in the mud that looked less like nails and more like claws dragged deliberately through the earth. I crouched down, my knees protesting, and studied them closely. There were 4 prints in total, leading from the water toward the tree line. I followed them, Murphy staying far behind, whining softly. The prints continued for maybe 20 meters, clear and deliberate, and then they stopped. Not faded, not obscured by leaves or brush, just stopped, as though whatever made them had been lifted into the air or had simply ceased to exist. I looked up. The branches overhead were thick and tangled, but I saw nothing. No disturbance in the leaves, no broken twigs, nothing that would suggest something had climbed or jumped or flown. I took out my old camera, the one I used to document repairs around the property, and photographed the prints. My hands were shaking more than I realized, and when I looked at the images later, they were blurred and indistinct, the shapes barely visible. I told myself it was the camera, that the lens was old and unreliable. But I knew the truth. My hands had been trembling, and I had been afraid. Over the following days, the smell grew stronger. It lingered around the stream, thick and cloying, impossible to ignore. Murphy refused to go near the water. Even when I called him, when I tried to coax him with food, he would not move past the edge of the clearing. He would stand there, staring at the tree line, his body tense and his ears flat, and I would feel that same cold dread settle into my chest. I began to avoid that part of the property. I stopped fishing in the stream. I stopped gathering wood from the lower slope. I stayed close to the cabin, keeping the doors locked even during the day, keeping the rifle within reach at all times. But every night, the sound returned. Always at the same time, just after full dark. Always from the same direction, that low, broken moan that shaped itself into words I almost understood. Help. Please. The voice, rough and wet, as though the throat it came from was damaged, torn, struggling to form sounds it had only recently learned. And the worst part, the part that kept me awake long into the night, was that the longer I listened, the more familiar the voice became. It did not sound like a stranger. It did not sound like something alien and unknown. It sounded like me. Not exactly, but close enough that I could hear the similarity. The cadence, the rhythm, the way the words broke and reformed, as though something out there in the darkness had been listening to my voice and was trying to imitate it, trying to call me, to lure me, to make me come closer. I stopped going outside after dark. I closed the curtains and turned the radio up loud to drown out the sound. I tried to convince myself it was stress, exhaustion, grief resurfacing after all these years. But Murphy knew better. He would not leave my side. He pressed himself against my leg, trembling, his eyes fixed on the windows, and I knew he could hear it too. Whatever was out there, it was real, and it was waiting. On the 4th day, the rescue team arrived. I heard them before I saw them. The crunch of boots on gravel, the rustle of gear, voices carrying through the morning air. 4 men moving slowly up the trail that led past my property, their faces drawn with exhaustion and their clothes stained with mud and pine sap. They looked like they had been searching for days without rest, their eyes hollow and their movements mechanical. I met them at the edge of the clearing. They introduced themselves. though I only remember one name clearly: Harlan, the team leader, a man in his 50s with a graying beard and a voice that carried the weight of too many failed searches. The others were younger, quieter, their faces showing a mix of determination and doubt. One of them, barely out of his 20s, kept checking his phone even though there was no signal this far up. I told them what I had heard, the sounds at night, the voice calling for help, the footprints by the stream. I showed them the photographs, though the images were blurred and barely showed anything at all. The young one laughed, a nervous sound that did not reach his eyes, and said it was probably coyotes, that they could sound remarkably human sometimes, especially at night when the acoustics played tricks. I wanted to believe him. Part of me wanted to laugh along, to accept the simple explanation and let them move on. But Harlan did not laugh. He studied the photographs in silence, his jaw tight, and when he looked up at me, there was something in his eyes that I recognized. Fear. Not the fear of a specific danger, but the fear of the unknown, of something that should not be possible but somehow is. He handed the camera back to me and said they would check the stream anyway. Just to be thorough. I stayed on the porch, watching. Murphy sat beside me, tense and alert, his eyes tracking every movement. The morning was cold, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones and stays there. The fog had lifted, but the light was weak and gray, filtering through the clouds in thin, colorless beams. The stream glittered in the distance, a ribbon of silver cutting through the trees. I watched the men move down the slope, their shapes growing smaller as they approached the water. Their radio crackled with static, the sound sharp and intrusive in the stillness. I could hear fragments of their conversation, words breaking up and reforming, though I could not make out what they were saying. The wind carried their voices up to me, distorted and strange, and I felt a tightness in my chest that I could not explain. Then, one of them shouted. The sound cut through the air like a knife, sharp and urgent, and the others rushed toward him. I saw them gather at the edge of the stream, their bodies forming a tight circle around something I could not see. The radio went silent. The wind seemed to stop. Even Murphy went still, his body rigid beside me. And then I heard it. A sound that made my blood turn cold. Not a scream, not a cry, but something between the two. A wet tearing noise, like fabric being ripped, followed by that same low moan I'd been hearing for days. But this time it was louder, more desperate, more real. I ran. My legs moved before my mind could catch up, carrying me down the slope toward the stream. The cold air burned my lungs and my boots slipped on the wet grass. But I did not slow down. I had to see. I had to know. When I reached them, Harlan was kneeling in the mud, his hands hovering over something that lay half in the water, half on the bank. At first, I could not process what I was seeing. It looked like a body, human-shaped at least, but wrong. So completely and utterly wrong that my mind struggled to accept it as real. The skin was pale, almost gray, covered in mud and what looked like blood. But the texture was off, slick and uneven, as though it had been stretched too tight over the bones beneath. The arms were too long, the joints bending at angles that did not match human anatomy. The hands were human, or seemed to be, but the fingers were splayed out in a way that looked painful, unnatural, as though they had been forced into that position and locked there. But the face, God, the face. It was turned toward me, partially submerged in the shallow water, and even through the mud and the distortion. I could see that it was trying to look human. The eyes were open, wide and unblinking, but they were set too far apart. The mouth hung slack, revealing teeth that were just slightly too sharp, too numerous. The nose was barely there, just a suggestion of cartilage beneath the skin. And then it moved. The head lifted slowly, water streaming from its face, and those two wide eyes fixed on me. The mouth opened wider, impossibly wide, and a sound came out. That same sound I had been hearing every night, that same broken, guttural approximation of human speech. Help me. But the voice was mine. Not similar, not close. Mine. Every intonation, every rhythm, every slight rasp from years of smoking in my youth. It was as though someone had recorded my voice and played it back through damaged speakers, distorted, but unmistakably me. Harlan jerked back, stumbling in the mud, his face pale. The other men stood frozen, their eyes wide with shock and confusion. The young one who had laughed earlier was making a sound in his throat, a high whimpering noise that he seemed unable to control. The thing in the water continued to stare at me. Its chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow movements, and its fingers twitched and spasmed. It was alive, conscious, aware, and it was wearing my voice like a stolen coat. One of the men, I never learned his name, pulled out his radio and tried to call for backup, but the device only produced static. He tried his phone, then the GPS unit, but nothing worked. The technology had failed, or perhaps something in the area was interfering with it. Harlan made the decision quickly. They would carry it back to their vehicle, get it to the hospital, let professionals figure out what it was. They lifted it carefully, wrapping it in an emergency blanket, and I watched them carry it up the slope and away from my property. The thing did not resist. It lay limp in their arms, its head lolling to one side, but those eyes never left me. Even as they disappeared into the trees, I could feel its gaze, cold and penetrating, burning into my skin. I stood by the stream for a long time after they left, staring at the spot where they had found it. The mud was churned and disturbed, dark with blood or something like blood. The smell lingered, metallic and organic, making my stomach turn. Murphy whined behind me, and when I turned, he was backing away, his tail tucked between his legs. He wanted to leave, to run, and part of me wanted to run with him, to abandon the cabin in the woods and never come back. But where would I go? This was my home, the only place I had left. I walked back slowly, my legs heavy and my mind numb. Inside the cabin, I locked the door and sat at the table with the rifle across my lap. I tried to tell myself that it was over, that whatever that thing was, it was gone now, in the hands of people who knew what to do with it. But deep down, I knew better. This was not over. It was only beginning. That night, I did not hear the voice calling from the stream. The silence was absolute, heavy and oppressive, pressing down on the cabin like a physical weight, and somehow that silence was worse than any sound could have been. Because now I knew. It was not out there in the woods, not anymore. It was out there in the world, wearing my voice, learning to be me. And I had no idea what it would do next. The newspapers arrived 5 days later when I made my monthly trip to town. I bought them all, every local publication that covered the region, and read them in the truck before driving back. The stories were brief, vague, carefully worded. A rescue team had recovered an unidentified injured person near Fairpine. The individual was being treated at the county hospital. No further details were available pending investigation, no names, no descriptions, nothing that would tell me what had really happened. I drove to the hospital. It took me 3 hours, winding down mountain roads that I knew by memory, through towns that had barely changed in decades. The hospital was small, a low brick building that served 3 counties, and the woman at the front desk looked at me with tired eyes when I asked about the rescue. She told me there was no record of anyone matching that description, no admission in the past week, no transfer to another facility. She suggested I might be thinking of a different hospital, or perhaps I had the dates wrong. I showed her the newspaper clipping. She read it, frowned, and said she would check with her supervisor. She disappeared through a door behind the desk and did not come back. After 30 minutes, a security guard approached me and politely suggested I leave. There was no point in arguing. I could see it in his face. He'd been told to get rid of me, to make me go away, and he would do it whether I cooperated or not. On the drive home, I tried calling the sheriff's office. The line rang 12 times before someone picked up. I explained who I was, what I had seen, what the rescue team had found. The deputy on the other end listened in silence, and when I finished, he asked me how old I was. I told him. He suggested, in a tone that was almost kind, that living alone in the mountains at my age was probably not the best idea, that sometimes isolation could do things to the mind, that he would send someone out to check on me if I felt unsafe. I hung up before he could finish. None of the 4 men from the rescue team returned to my cabin. I waited, thinking they might come back to ask more questions, to tell me what they had found. But the days passed and the trail stayed empty. I tried looking them up online during my next trip to town using the library computer. I found references to the search and rescue operation, news articles about the missing campers, but nothing about what had been recovered from the stream. No follow-up, no closure, just silence. That silence felt deliberate, as though someone had decided that certain information should not be public, as though the thing they had carried away was too strange, too impossible to be explained. 2 nights after I returned from the hospital, the voice came back. But this time it was different. This time it was not calling from the stream. It was calling from closer, much closer. I woke to the sound of my name. Henry. Spoken softly, almost tenderly, in a voice that sounded like mine but was not mine. It came from outside the cabin, somewhere near the western wall. I lay in bed, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and listened. The voice came again. Henry. Then a pause. Stay. Another pause. Here. Murphy was not in the cabin. I realized it with a cold, sick feeling that spread through my chest. He always slept by the stove, always, but when I looked, the space was empty. I called his name, no response. I got up, grabbed the flashlight and the rifle, and went to the door. It was locked from the inside, exactly as I had left it. The windows were latched. Nothing had been opened. But Murphy was gone. I searched the cabin, every corner, every shadow, calling his name until my voice went hoarse. Nothing. I opened the door and shone the light across the clearing, expecting to see him standing there, waiting to come back in. But the clearing was empty. Just the wind moving through the grass and the dark line of trees beyond. I found his collar the next morning. It was lying in the mud near the stream, the leather still damp, the metal tag glinting in the early light. Beside it, pressed deep into the soft earth, was a handprint, human in shape, but wrong. The fingers were too long, spread too wide, and the impression was so deep it looked as though something impossibly heavy had pressed down with all its weight. I buried the collar behind the cabin, near the small garden where Mary's herbs used to grow. I did not know what else to do. Murphy had been my companion for years, the only living thing that had kept me tethered to some sense of normalcy. And now he was gone. Taken. By something that wore a human shape but was not human, something that knew my name and spoke with my voice. After that, the sounds became constant, every night without fail. Sometimes it was knocking. Soft taps on the windows, rhythmic and patient, as though whatever was outside was testing to see if I would respond. Sometimes it was footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving across the porch back and forth for hours. Sometimes it was scratching. Long, slow drags against the wood of the back door, like nails or claws searching for a way in. I stopped sleeping. I sat in the chair by the stove with the rifle across my lap, watching the door, listening to every sound. The exhaustion was crushing, a weight that pressed down on my thoughts and made everything feel distant and unreal. I began to lose track of time. Days blurred together. I would look at the clock and realize hours had passed, without me noticing, or I would think only minutes had gone by and find that the sun had set. Things in the cabin began to change. Small things at first. Tools moved from one place to another. My coffee mug, the one Mary had given me years ago, appeared on the table even though I knew I had left it in the sink. The pages of my notebook were turned to entries I had not read, with certain words underlined in pencil, words I had not underlined myself. I started locking everything, not just the doors and windows, but the drawers, the cabinets, even the trunk where I kept Mary's things. I needed to know that if something moved, if something changed, it was not me, that I was not losing my mind. But the locks did not help. I would wake from a brief, restless sleep and find the trunk open, Mary's scarf draped across the back of the chair. I would close a drawer and return an hour later to find it open again, the contents rearranged. It was as though something was moving through the cabin while I was not looking, touching my things, studying my life. I tried recording the sounds. I had an old cassette recorder, something I had used years ago to document bird calls, and I set it up by the window and let it run through the night. In the morning, I played the tape back. Most of it was silence, the soft hiss of the recording mechanism. But near the end, there was something else. Breathing. Slow and labored, wet and ragged, as though something with damaged lungs was standing just outside the glass, listening. And beneath the breathing, barely audible, there were words. My voice, distorted and fragmented, repeating the same phrases over and over. Henry, stay here. Don't leave. I destroyed the tape, pulled the ribbon out and burned it in the stove, watching the plastic curl and melt and turn to black smoke. But I could not destroy the memory of what I had heard. It stayed with me, echoing in my thoughts, a constant reminder that whatever was out there, it was learning, growing, becoming more like me with every passing night. I thought about leaving, packing what I could carry and driving down the mountain and never coming back. But where would I go? What would I tell people? That something in the woods was pretending to be me? That it had taken my dog and was now living in the spaces around my cabin, watching and waiting? They would lock me up. They would say I was senile, delusional, dangerous to myself. And part of me wondered if they would be right. If maybe all of this was just my mind breaking down, the loneliness finally consuming me completely. Maybe there was no creature, no voice, no handprints in the mud. Maybe it was just me, an old man alone in the woods, talking to himself and forgetting, losing the boundary between what was real and what was imagined. But then I would hear it again, that voice, my voice, calling from the darkness, and I would know with a certainty that went beyond reason that it was real. Something was out there, something that had learned to mimic me, and it was getting closer. The confrontation happened on the 8th night. I had been awake for what felt like days, though I could not be certain. Time had become elastic, unreliable. I would look at the clock and see that hours had passed in what felt like minutes, or minutes had stretched into something that felt like years. My body ached with exhaustion, my eyes burned, and my thoughts moved slowly, as though wading through deep water. I had been sitting in the chair by the stove, the rifle across my lap, staring at the door. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a faint orange glow across the room. The wind outside had picked up, rattling the windows and making the cabin creak and settle. Every sound made my heart race, every shadow seemed to move. And then I heard it. The door. Not knocking this time, not scratching, the handle turning. Slowly, carefully, as though someone was testing to see if it was locked. I watched, frozen, as the metal moved a fraction of an inch, then stopped. There was a pause. Then it turned again, more insistently. The door did not open. I had locked it, bolted it, even wedged a chair under the handle. But the turning continued, back and forth, testing, searching for a way through. And then it stopped. Silence. Complete and absolute. The kind of silence that feels like a held breath, like the world waiting for something terrible to happen. Then I heard footsteps, heavy and slow, moving around the cabin, from the front door to the side wall, past the window, toward the back. I stood up, the rifle trembling in my hands, and moved to follow the sound. I could track its progress by the creak of the boards on the porch, the soft thud of weight shifting from one foot to the other. It stopped at the back door. I heard the handle turn there too, testing, searching. My mouth was dry. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the rifle. I wanted to call out, to demand that whatever was there leave, go away, never come back. But my voice would not work. The words stuck in my throat, trapped by a fear so profound it felt like drowning. And then the door slammed open, not the back door, the front, the one I had been watching, the one I had locked and bolted and wedged shut. It flew open with a crash that shook the entire cabin, the chair I had wedged beneath it skittering across the floor. Cold air rushed in, carrying with it that smell, that terrible metallic smell of blood and rot, and something older, something wrong. I spun around, bringing the rifle up, and saw it standing in the doorway. The figure was backlit by moonlight, a dark silhouette against the pale night beyond. At first, I could not make out details, just the shape. Human-sized, human-shaped, but somehow wrong in proportions, in posture, in the way it stood. It did not move. It just stood there, swaying slightly as though struggling to maintain balance. Then it stepped inside. The light from the dying. Fire caught its face, and my blood turned to ice. Because it was my face. Not similar, not close. Mine. Every line, every scar, every mark of age that I saw in the mirror each morning. The same gray hair, the same tired eyes, the same weathered skin. It was me, standing in my own doorway, staring at myself. But the eyes were wrong. Empty, vacant, like windows into nothing. And the skin, though it held the right shape, had that same strange texture I had seen on the thing by the stream. Too smooth in some places, too rough in others, as though it had been applied like paint over something that was not meant to wear it. The mouth opened. My mouth. And that voice came out again, the one I'd been hearing for days, shaped now with more precision, more accuracy. Help me. The words were clearer this time, almost right, but still just slightly off. The rhythm was wrong, the emphasis misplaced, like an actor who had learned lines phonetically without understanding their meaning. It took a step closer. The arms moved strangely, the joints bending at angles that made my stomach turn. One hand reached out toward me, the fingers splayed wide, trembling. The gesture might have been a plea, or it might have been something else. I could not tell. All I knew was that it was coming toward me, and I could not move, could not breathe, could not think. I pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the small space, the sound crashing through the cabin and echoing off the walls. The figure jerked backward, stumbled, and fell. I fired again, then again, the rifle kicking hard against my shoulder, the smell of gunpowder sharp and acrid. The figure collapsed onto the floor, a dark heap near the doorway. I stood there, shaking, the rifle still raised, waiting for it to move again. But it did not. It lay still, motionless, the shadows gathering around it like a shroud. The only sound was my own breathing, harsh and ragged, and the ringing in my ears from the shots. I moved closer, slowly, the rifle never lowering. I needed to see, needed to know what I had killed. I reached for the lamp, my hands fumbling with the switch, and when the light came on, bright and sudden, I saw nothing. There was nothing on the floor. No body, no blood, no sign that anything had been there at all. Just the old rug, worn and faded, and the floorboards beneath it, clean and undisturbed. I stared, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. I had fired 3 shots. I had seen it fall, but there was nothing there. I turned, looking wildly around the cabin. The walls were clean. The door hung open, swinging gently in the breeze, but there were no marks, no damage, no indication that anything had forced its way inside. I checked the floor, looking for tracks, for mud, for anything that would prove I had not imagined it. But there was nothing. And then I saw the mirror. The old standing mirror that had belonged to Mary, positioned near the far wall. The glass was shattered, spiderwebbed with cracks radiating out from 3 distinct points, bullet holes. I'd shot the mirror. I'd seen my own reflection and fired at it, believing it was the creature. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I sank to my knees, the rifle slipping from my hands, and stared at the broken glass. My own face stared back, fragmented and distorted, split into 1,000 pieces. I do not know how long I stayed there. Minutes, hours. Eventually, I called the sheriff's office. I do not remember what I said, just that I needed help, that something was wrong, that I thought I had shot someone. They came eventually. 2 deputies and the sheriff himself, a man named Warren, who I had met once or twice over the years. They searched the cabin, the clearing, the woods around the property. They found the broken mirror, the bullet holes in the wall where the shots had passed through. They found me sitting on the porch, still holding the rifle, unable to speak coherently. Warren sat down beside me and asked what had happened. I tried to explain, about the sounds, the voice, the thing I had seen. But the words came out jumbled and confused, and I could see in his eyes that he did not believe me. He suggested gently that perhaps the isolation had been harder on me than I realized, that grief could do strange things to a person, that I should come into town, let a doctor look at me, maybe stay with someone for a while. I refused. I told them I was fine, that it had been a mistake, that I had been half asleep and confused. They did not look convinced, but they could not force me to leave. Warren made me promise to call if I needed anything, and then they left, driving slowly down the trail, their taillights disappearing into the trees. I was admitted to the hospital 3 days later, not by choice. Warren had spoken to a judge, convinced him that I was a danger to myself. 2 social workers arrived with a court order and drove me down the mountain, and I spent a week in a psychiatric ward where doctors asked me questions I could not answer and gave me pills that made everything feel distant and gray. They said I had experienced a psychotic episode, that the isolation, the grief, the age had combined into something that broke me. They talked about early onset dementia, about hallucinations, about the need for supervision and care. I nodded and agreed with everything they said because I knew arguing would only make them keep me longer. When they finally let me go, I returned to the cabin. It looked exactly as I had left it, clean, orderly. The mirror had been removed, the bullet holes patched. Someone had been inside tidying up, erasing the evidence of what had happened. But on the door, just visible in the morning light, were footprints, fresh ones, pressed into the dirt of the porch, the same elongated shape, the same pointed marks at the toes, and beside them, lying on the step, was Murphy's collar. Inside, on the kitchen table, was a cassette tape I had never seen before. My old recorder sat beside it as though someone had placed it there deliberately. I picked up the tape with shaking hands and pressed play. My voice came through the speaker, but I had not recorded it. The words were mine, but I had never spoken them into the device. Help me. I'm not him. Please. Someone. Help me. The voice repeated the phrases over and over, desperate and broken, and I realized with a cold, sick certainty what it meant. The thing had not just learned to sound like me. It had learned to think like me, to feel like me. It was not trying to replace me. It was trying to be me. And somewhere, somehow, it was calling for help because it did not know what it was becoming. I am writing these final lines with a hand that trembles not from fear, but from exhaustion, from the weight of knowing, from the understanding that some truths are too heavy to carry and too dangerous to ignore. I do not know how much time I have left. Hours, perhaps, maybe only minutes. The sounds have returned, and this time they are not outside. They are above me, in the attic, moving with a patience that feels almost meditative. Footsteps that match my own rhythm, a presence that breathes when I breathe. I have stopped running. There is nowhere to go. Whatever this thing is, it has been with me all along, learning, adapting, becoming, and I am too tired to fight it anymore. I've spent the last few days trying to understand what I encountered, what was carried out of that stream by men who never returned, what stood in my doorway wearing my face, what calls to me now in my own voice, begging for help from somewhere in the structure of this cabin. I do not think it is evil. That would be simpler, easier to comprehend. Evil has intention, purpose, a desire to harm. But this thing, whatever it is, seems lost, confused, like a child learning to speak by repeating sounds it does not understand. It mimics because that is all it knows how to do. It takes shape because shape is what it sees, and it learns by consuming, by absorbing, by wearing the skins of what it encounters until the boundary between itself and its subject dissolves completely. The rescue team found it injured, broken, barely alive. They thought they were saving someone, but what they actually did was give it exactly what it needed: human contact, human compassion, the assumption of humanity. They spoke to it, touched it, looked it in the eyes, and saw a person in distress. And in doing so, they taught it what it meant to be a person. I wonder now if the missing campers were its first teachers, if they encountered it in some form, incomplete and primitive, and tried to help, if their kindness became the foundation of its education, if their voices, their faces, their gestures were the raw material it used to build its approximation of human form. I wonder what happened to them, if they are still out there somewhere, wandering the mountains, trying to remember who they were, or if they are gone entirely, absorbed into something that wears their memories like borrowed clothes. The nights here are long now. The darkness comes early and stays late, and in the hours between dusk and dawn, I hear it moving, sometimes in the walls, sometimes in the ceiling, sometimes just outside the window, standing in the same spot where Murphy used to stand, waiting to be let in. I found another tape yesterday. I do not know where it came from. It was sitting on my desk, next to this notebook, as though placed there while I slept. When I played it, I heard conversations I do not remember having. My voice talking to someone or something, explaining the cabin, the routine, the memories of Mary. Teaching, the way you would teach a child who wanted to understand your life. I do not remember recording it, but the voice is mine. The words are mine. And somewhere in the background, beneath my talking, there's another sound. Breathing, listening, learning. I think it has been here longer than I realized, not just since the rescue team found it, but before, weeks, maybe months, watching from the tree line, following Murphy on his walks, studying the way I move, the way I speak, the patterns of my days. And slowly, carefully, it began to mirror those patterns, to integrate itself into my life so gradually that I did not notice until it was too late. The footprints I found were not from something approaching. They were from something that had already arrived. The sounds at night were not threats. They were lessons, practice, rehearsals for the moment when it would finally be ready to step into my place entirely. I am not afraid of dying. I am 72 years old, and I have lived longer than I ever expected to after Mary left. Death is not the enemy. But the thought of something else, wearing my name, speaking with my voice, living my life after I am gone, that terrifies me in a way I cannot articulate. Not because it would harm anyone, but because it would be me, or close enough that no one would know the difference. And the real me, the person I have been for 7 decades, would simply cease to exist, erased, replaced, forgotten, or perhaps that has already happened. Perhaps I am not the original anymore. Perhaps the thing in the attic is the real Henry Calhoun, and I am the copy, the echo, the approximation that does not realize it is incomplete. How would I know? How could anyone know? That is the true horror. Not the creature itself, but the uncertainty it creates, the dissolution of identity, the realization that the self is not fixed, not permanent, but something fluid and replicable, something that can be learned, performed, stolen. I think of the rescue team often, 4 men who walked into these woods with purpose and hope, trying to save lives. Where are they now? What are they now? Did they make it back to their families, their homes, their normal lives? Or are they sitting somewhere, writing in notebooks like this one, trying to explain something that cannot be explained? I think of Mary. If she were here, what would she say? Would she believe me? Or would she, like the doctors and the sheriff and the social workers, think I had finally lost my mind? Maybe she would be right. Maybe this is all delusion, the final unraveling of a brain too old and too damaged to distinguish between memory and imagination. But the footprints are real. The collar is real. The tape is real. I am holding them now, physical objects that exist outside my mind. Unless I am so far gone that even the concept of reality has become negotiable. If someone finds this notebook, I want them to know what I have learned, that there are things in the world that do not fit our understanding, things that exist in the spaces between categories, between definitions, things that watch and learn and adapt. And the most dangerous thing about them is not their strangeness, but their ability to become familiar, to mirror us so completely that we no longer recognize where they end and we begin. The men who rescued that thing from the stream thought they were doing good. They saw something hurt and broken and they responded with compassion. But compassion, like any tool, can be used for purposes we do not intend. Kindness can be a doorway. Understanding can be an invitation. And sometimes the thing we save is the thing that consumes us. I hear it now. The footsteps have stopped. The breathing has stopped. There is only silence. And in that silence, I feel a presence. Close. So close I could reach out and touch it. But I will not look. I will keep writing until I cannot write anymore, until the pencil falls from my hand, and these words become the last evidence that I existed. If you hear your own voice calling to you from the darkness, if you see your own face looking back at you from places you have never been, if you find footprints that match your own, leading away from your door, do not follow them, do not answer, do not try to understand. Because the truth has a price, and sometimes that price is everything you are. The solitude I sought here was meant to be my sanctuary, a A place where I could exist without performance, without expectation, without the need to be anyone other than who I was. But solitude is a double-edged thing. It protects, but it also exposes. It gives you space to be yourself, but it also gives other things space to become you. I thought I was alone here, but I never was. Something was always watching, always learning, always waiting for the moment when I would be vulnerable enough, tired enough, broken enough to let it in. And now it is here, in the room. I can feel it behind me. The temperature has dropped. The air smells like earth and metal, the same smell from the stream. I will not turn around. I will finish this sentence, and then I will put down the pencil, and whatever happens next will happen without my resistance. Because I am tired. So tired. And maybe, just maybe, if I let go, if I stop fighting, it will all make sense. Maybe the thing wearing my face knows something I do not. Maybe it understands what I'm supposed to become. Or maybe I'm already gone, and these words are being written by something that only thinks it is Henry Calhoun, something that learned to hold a pencil and form letters and believe in its own existence. There is no way to know. And perhaps that is the final lesson. That certainty is an illusion. That identity is a story we tell ourselves. That the line between real and imitation is thinner than we ever imagined. The wind is picking up outside. The pines are swaying. The stream is running 200 meters down the slope over stones that have been there forever. And here, in this cabin, something is breathing behind me. I hope whoever finds this understands. I hope they know I tried to warn them. I hope they do not make the same mistake I did. But I suspect they will, because we are human, and humans always answer when something calls our name.